What's the weirdest thing you've seen someone do in public that they thought nobody noticed? Riding the SkyTrain monorail, public transportation in Vancouver, BC, I watched a man in the front center seat with an imaginary steering wheel, turning it around curves, pulling back to slow it, pushing forward to start it up, very discreetly with his hands close to his lap. The whole ride. Homeless dude straight up just appeared out of a manhole Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle style and walked away like business as usual. One afternoon, I was sitting in my car at a park, and a woman walked up wearing a Santa hat, and went over to the boat launch and pulled out a sheet of paper and proceeded to sing a few Christmas carols to the ducks and geese in the river. Then she put it away and left. He'll never know why she did it, but it was super charming and just the right amount of weird. Worked next to probation office. Tuesdays were check-in days. We spent a lot of the day watching out the windows. 1. A guy reaches down his pants and rummages around in the back, pulls out his hand and smells it. 2. Guy pulls up in minivan. PO calls PD to run drug dog around the van. Dog indicates. They open van sliding door. It is a mobile meth lab. I once had a colleague who would fairly regularly sneeze into his hand, wait a few seconds, and then do one of the following. Wipe it on his shoulder under the guise of having a scratch. Wipe it on his chair under the guise of shifting his weight. Was funny how he never had an itch to scratch or a need to shift his weight at any other time. So anyway, I petitioned my manager for a phone just for me that I didn't need to share with him. I saw a huge homeless woman on a street corner by a business park sign start turning around in circles for a little bit, then eventually stop and pull her pants down and take a shit next to the sign while everyone waiting at the street light looked on in horror. Then I got a haircut and went to my wedding. I watched a woman pepper spray herself in a Walmart parking lot. At a baseball game in a stadium full of people, see a guy a few rows down pick up his bare foot and bite his toenails off. In public, I saw a guy drop a donut on the ground right next to a piece of what I assume was dog shit, but I guess very well may have been human shit. He looked around and picked up the piece of shit instead of the donut and looked around again, and then put the shit in his mouth really quickly. This was near an area with a lot of mentally unwell homeless people. To this day I still wonder if in his head he accidentally picked up the shit thinking it was the donut, or did he drop the donut to try to trick everyone else around cause he wanted us to think he was grabbing his donut again when really he wanted that tasty piece of poo. This was in the early 2000s when malls were still a functioning retail center. There was a bodywork shop, and they had their Testers body sprays mostly out front. This older lady walks up, lifts her dress, and sprays her pelvic region. She then just continues on like nothing was odd about what just transpired. I was sitting in a train food court and caught some guy stroke himself off for a few seconds under the table. This was in downtown Chicago. Saw someone walking into a local mall carrying a glass of water from their house, like a glass cup. It was really awesome, and I think about it now, like 15 years later. Once saw a dude trying to not to walk on the cracks of the sidewalk. Every time he would walk on one he would smack his face then continue walking. Shit his pants and shakes it out of his pant leg. A grown man in the store I worked at. One day on my way to or from work, a woman entered the tram, barefoot, looking like she was once well dressed, but now rather disheveled, with an equally disheveled flower bouquet in hands. She sat down, sang some made-up sounding song to herself, rode maybe 2 stations and got off. It was in northern Germany, which typically doesn't have the best weather. She looked like she didn't really notice herself that she was in public, let alone thinking about if someone could notice what she did. Saw a dude in line stealth dancing, like full-on grooving, but trying to keep it low-key. Dude thought he was invisible behind his coffee cup, but nah, we all saw and just vibed with it. Turned a regular morning into a silent disco, low-key. There is this dude, in his 40s, that moves his hands like he has re-force to open automatic doors. It is subtle, just a little flick, without raising his arms, but he does it all the time. I see him reflected in the glass every time I do it. All of my stories are from the NYC subway, where there's an equal chance they knew people saw and didn't care either way. Still, weirdest might be a guy who shoved his hand down the back of his pants, scratched around with his fingers, pulled it out, wiped his fingers on a tissue that was then covered in brown, and put the tissue in his pocket. Was in the soaking pool at the McMenamin's Grand Lodge in Forest Grove. It's basically a giant hot tub that's the size of a swimming pool, but like warm bath water temperature, and a couple was near our group, 6 or so. At first glance I figured they were just making out, but then between her somewhat rhythmic bobbing up and down and what could be fairly clearly seen under the water, she was riding his disco stick, and judging by the fact about 34 of the people were watching, they were absolutely not being as discreet as they thought. He was slunk down in the water with his face in her boobs, and she was facing away from the water towards some bushes, so I doubt either of them realized we all knew what they were doing, or they did and didn't care. Walmart. You know how they have pastries by the deli, but then they have some in the middle of the aisles? Well, I was strolling by and I saw an elderly woman open a container, lick a cookie, and put it back. I was so shocked I didn't think it was real. I'll never buy any that aren't by the deli and stickered closed.